other cards that we've seen in Standards past, and that will definitely lead to some interesting metagaming. But we have heard that the players are now ready in our feature match area, and that is great news for all of us because it means we get to head back down to our feature match area for just a little bit more live magic here from Grand Prix Birmingham. Hello and welcome to this round 13 of Grand Prix Birmingham. We're going to get a chance to see Greg Holmes and Luke Southworth, two English players who have made it to a 10-2 record. Greg on black-green Constrictor, Luke on black-red Vehicles. Each of these decks harkening back to both successful decks from previous standards, but also with a few nice new touches to update them just a little bit. One of those new touches there in the form of Lamar Elves. New, old, it's kind of hard to say when, I mean, that is a copy of Lamar Elves from Revised that is being cast off a Portal 3 Kingdoms Forest. Hard to say that it's completely new, but certainly a big addition to this standard format, which has shaken things up a little bit.
Medium-aged Lamar Elves.
Yeah, something like that. And Luke Southworth there with his Heart of Kieran on turn 2, with the potential to attack in for plenty soon enough. Greg there with a Glint Sleeve Siphoner will be able to generate a little bit of energy and potentially a few cards along the way. But this is exactly the kind of board that, if Luke Southworth does have a third mountain and a Goblin Chain Whirler, will be pretty painful for Greg. He'll lose a couple of creatures and not really have gained anything for the time and trouble that he's invested thus far.
If Luke has a Chain Whirler here, that's almost game over. You trade 2 for 1 and you get a 3/3 first striker and you can crew the Heart of Kieran.
As things stand, the Swamp says that there'll be a different plan here. We have Scrap Heap Scrounger alongside Bomat Courier. That means that we are going to get 2 creatures attacking here. And it looks like Greg Holmes happy enough to offer the trade here. Glint Sleeve Siphoner, yes, it's a powerful card, but I think that Greg correctly identifying there that this Black-Red Vehicles deck, it represents a lot of damage very quickly. And giving it the opportunity to refill on cards in hand is probably not something you want to let it have.
Yeah, and the more powerful the start is for your opponent, the scarier Bomat Courier becomes, and that's actually the secret to its power level. If your opponent is already depleting their hand very quickly, it also means that Bomat Courier is threatening to refuel. So I think we are actually seeing more aggressive blocks on Bomat Courier than we've seen in the past, which is probably the right choice.
I must admit that, like, when you're describing different formats, and this applies more to Limited than Constructed, though a little bit of both, as Vraska's Contempt comes in here on Scrap Heap Scrounger. When a format gets described as a blocking format, to me that means that there's just a whole extra level of interplay that you're going to see. If it works out that actually all of the decks are aggressive, there are various mechanics or individual cards that really push attacking, then it's almost like you've got 2 players racing to see who can do better at attacking. Once you throw blocking into the mix, you can really create some quite complicated board states where better players or players who maybe teched out their deck differently can really reap the rewards.
There's only one thing better than blocking, Tim. That's double blocking.
Whew. There's only one thing better than double blocking, and that's blowing out the double block with some kind of a clever instant, because ultimately we all know that spells are better than creatures, and if you can use one to get a sweet 2 for 1 somewhere in the mix there, certainly not the end of the world, at least for one player. Winding Constrictor coming along here, along with a Walking Ballista to follow up. There will be a Point of Pain from that if near Deadlands, and actually there's a response of an Abrade here, so the Walking Ballista is only going to come into play with a single counter. Luke Southworth ready for something to come from the other side of the table there. Let's see what his follow-up is here. All right, there's the Goblin Chain Whirler, and he's found his value. It took a little bit later than perhaps we had first prophesied, but you know what? That Chain Whirler has still dealt with a couple of creatures. It's crewing up a Heart of Kieran. This is Chain Whirler living its best life, dealing damage in a whole variety of different ways to Greg Holmes. Now on 12 to Luke Southworth 17.
This is where Greg Holmes is contemplating his life choices. Drawing so many 1 toughness creatures in his opening hand certainly wasn't the best idea.
Lurking Chupacabra there is able to deal with that Goblin Chain Whirler, the 2/2 body, also sticking around to potentially get attacks in, maybe block another key threat coming from the other side of things. Luke Southworth now, he's starting to cast bigger creatures. A Walking Ballista here with 2 counters on it.
It's a little bit of a relief for Greg, who doesn't take 4 damage from Heart of Kiran this turn.
Yeah, any turns reprieve that he's able to achieve here, very much appreciated. And the Chupacabra getting stuck in here, not too much worry of a block really coming from Luke Southworth. On 17 life, he can afford to take a little hit. A fatal push post-combat here on Walking Ballista, though, almost certainly will provoke a response. 2 damage upstairs or kill off the Chupacabra?
I'll kill off the Chupacabra. I mean, 2 damage, 11 or 9 is not that big of a difference. And Luke needs to draw something, so he knows that the game will most likely take a while here.
So Jade Light Ranger there. A little shortcut to the second explore because Greg Holmes quite happy to leave his Walking Ballista on top of his deck there. Doesn't mind too much his opponent knows about it, because you know what, even when you know about it, it can be a little bit fiddly to play around that particular construct. And cut there. It didn't matter whether or not the Explorer was very successful for Jade Light Ranger or not. It was always going to kill off the Merfolk Scout. Ribbons in the graveyard, which at some point may prove relevant. We've seen it happen from time to time. Vraska's Contempt off the top here for a Jade Light Ranger. Again, a card that is happily left on top for Greg Holmes. 2+1/+1 counters coming along with that Explore. Or that pair of Explores, should I say.
Yeah, and Greg very successfully here keeping Luke off of creatures. It's very important that Scrap Heap Scrounger got exiled. Otherwise, it would have returned from the battlefield. And I think it's a smart plan in general to try to not fight against Heart of Kiran directly, but to attack all the other creatures. Not only do you have the chance to let your opponent flood out like that, you also make future Heart of Kirans basically worthless.
So Walking Ballista coming along now. Pia Nala the play from Luke Southworth. This will mean that Dad's car gets to get driven away by Mum here, if he so chooses.
Greg could have prevented that, but it would have been a super aggressive play where he shoots Pia before the Thopter token enters the battlefield.
As things stand, at least a Thopter getting shot down here. Greg Holmes taking a big hit there as Pia Nala getting activated twice to pump up Heart of Kiran.
A little note there, not that it's relevant in this particular game, but in general, if you have the choice to shoot something with Walking Ballista at the end of turn, it's usually correct to wait till your own turn, because it's not an ability that benefits from untapping, because it doesn't cost any mana.
So the life total's 5-6 here. Luke Southworth, he's drawn a lot of lands, but you know what? Pia Nala are one of the better creatures to have around when you do have access to a lot of mana. If you can just find a creature to crew Heart of Kiran, it's likely that he'll be able to attack for the win this next turn. But in the meantime, he needs to figure out what he's going to do about the big attacks coming in from Greg Holmes here.
And Greg has 5 mana open, so that's definitely a concern as well. He could have used 4 mana to pump Walking Ballista, but didn't. So Luke has to expect some response from Greg.
Yeah, and Greg Holmes in not a bad shape here. Even if it works out that he doesn't have anything clever to do mid-combat here, he still has access to, if near Deadlands, on the battlefield for a post-combat bit of removal. Ultimately, though, Glorybringer, if you had to pick a decent top deck in the format, Glorybringer has to be close to the top of that list and indeed that deck.
And is that lethal is the question. I don't think it's sufficient on its own. Let's see. If Greg uses Walking Ballista to shoot down Pia in response to Glorybringer, then Glorybringer can hit for 4 or crew the Heart of Kiran, which also only attacks for 4. But if Greg lets the Glorybringer resolve, then Heart of Kiran can attack for 5 with the help of Pia's activated ability.
Let's see whether or not Greg Holmes sees it. Good old-fashioned race we find ourselves in here all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, I think Greg has actually played this very well. He turned it into a race that he was maybe not super likely to win, but that gave him a really good shot at outracing the Black-Red Vehicle stack. Did Luke just miss a win?
He does
With
have ribbons
ribbons
in the graveyard and a lot of lands in play. I was just thinking about the exact same thing, that this is a line of play that opens the door to Greg Holmes potentially being able to disrupt things, whereas ribbons is a fairly straightforward, clean bunch of damage to the head here.
So Luke top decks a Glory Bringer, but misses the fact that he has a lethal ribbons in the graveyard.
And it looks like the exact attack that Luke has gone for here was an attack and then exerts to kill off the one remaining blocker for Greg Holmes. It may be that this does end up... No, this is still just going to be one short.
Yes, but it has severely limited Greg's chances here. Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, I guess that means that the ribbons would also have not been good enough, as there was 2 extra points of life left in the tank for Greg Holmes. We'll see whether or not Luke...
So maybe Luke was aware of the ribbons but wanted to play around Restless Contempt. That's definitely an option.
All right, well, Greg Holmes here can get an attack in for 2 and then threatens 2 more points of damage.
The Glorybringer, of course, doesn't untap.
Ultimately, that's not the relevant thing, though. Ribbons does come along in that turn there for Luke Southworth to be able to pick up the victory. This game 1. We will have plenty more magic from these two soon enough. Do not go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.
Look around you. War is coming. Evil is taking root. You fought for Dominaria before.
This isn't my fight anymore.
This is everyone's fight. Remember who you are. You are a Planeswalker.
Looking for a place to hang out and play Magic? Head to your local game store this and every Friday to play Friday Night Magic events. Get more info at magic.wizards.com/FNM.
Hello and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Birmingham. This is round 13. Both of our English players here, Greg Holmes and Luke Southworth, at 10 and 2. The one differentiator in their records is that Luke Southworth was the one that won his game 1 here in this matchup. Black-red vehicles for him up against black-green Constrictor for Greg Holmes. And the sheer power level of some of the cards in the black-red vehicles deck just means that it can have a reasonable draw and feel entirely unreasonable when you're playing against it.
No, we're seeing a lot of that. I think the Black-green Constrictor deck is probably the most extreme example. If Winding Constrictor gets out of control, it's just super, super strong.
Yeah, meanwhile, each and every card in Luke Southworth's deck just doing what it does at a pretty exciting rate and able to do what it does relatively consistently regardless of what's going on the board. Looks like we may have a mulligan here from Greg Holmes. We have not missed any magic during those ad breaks, don't you worry. Making sure that we bring you as much standard as we possibly can and just sneaking in those ads where appropriate. So 6 cards now. Looks like this is going to be a keep because here's the scry from Greg Holmes. Will it be good enough to stay on top? Looks like it will. Holmes, of course, will be on the play, having dropped game 1 to Luke Southworth here. And his black-green list, in some respects, getting a Land Morels on the first turn looks like one of the better things that you can do. But in point of fact, when there are so many ways of killing the 1/1, maybe this other green 1-drop might be a better option.
Yeah, and I'm actually a bit concerned if Black-green Constrictor cannot beat the red aggressive decks, mostly because of the power of Chain Whirler, then I don't feel that Black-green Constrictor is in such a good place. Even though it looked to be a very popular deck going into Dominaria Standard.
Yeah, adventurous impulse there, basically just allowing Greg Holmes a little bit of card selection in the early stages of this game. A Walking Ballista, the follow-up from him. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Luke Southworth for black-red vehicles. He's not so worried about getting something done on turn 1, but having that Heart of Kiran on turn 2 does open up a lot of very potent plays for him in future turns. So Holmes here, he had to play that 1/1 Walking Ballista. I've not really enjoyed seeing them at any point where we've seen them thus far in this game, and plays a Winding Constrictor before putting an Ether Hub into play. That means he got 2 energy rather than just the 1. The cost to that, though, he did take a point of damage from Ifnir Deadlands to be able to cast that Winding Constrictor.
See if Luke has the Goblin Chain Whirler. It's kind of the perfect, not 1-2 punch, but 2-3 punch. Heart of Kiran followed by Goblin Chain Whirler.
And even if the Chain Whirler isn't there, something like a Scrap Heap Scrounger just for the crewing ability is pretty decent. As things stand, though, an Abrade to deal with Winding Constrictor. I guess if you know that your opponent is going to be able to resolve a few more spells, then you want to make sure that those spells have as minimal impact as possible. And with Winding Constrictor in play, quite a lot of different ways that Greg Holmes' deck can get a little bit out of hand here. So a bit of damage control there with that Abrade.
Abrade looks really, really nicely positioned. It kills off Winding Constrictor, it kills off Goblin Chain Whirler, and there are so many powerful artifacts being played right now.
And imagine how good that Rishkar Pima Renegade that's come down from Greg Holmes would have been had Winding Constrictor been on the battlefield. Putting a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures is good. Doubling that up, you're all the better. And the Abrade there early on from Luke Southworth has saved him a little bit of trouble here. And
Yeah,
does he have the 4th land?
He is still under so much pressure, right? The Chandra doesn't really fight well against a Walking Ballista. A lot of the spells in the Black-red vehicles deck cost 4. Scrap Heap Scrounger can't block, so it's not looking too great.
And a fatal push here on Heart of Kiran. That a big blow to Luke Southworth's game plan here. He loses his big attacker. He's just got a Scrap Heap Scrounger. That's not going to be any good at blocking whatsoever. And in the meantime, Greg Holmes gets to put some real hurt on the life total of Luke Southworth. Lamorel's coming down here. We can see that there's at least a couple of different 4-drops on Luke Southworth's deck here.
It looked like Greg was considering not playing that land for bluffing reasons, but I really like revealing your hand here. Pumping Ballista is just such a powerful play when your opponent is already under so much pressure.
Yeah, the pump and then the attack there, dropping Luke Southworth to just 12 life. Walking Ballista representing 3 damage on the table, even if it is that Southworth can find a way of dealing with the powerful construct. But with 4 mana now, a few more options available to Luke. This is the turn where he can either potentially go spell, maybe a couple of removal spells to try and even things out here, or indeed maybe throw a Planeswalker onto the battlefield, though this doesn't feel like a very safe place for Chandra to be living right now.
Exactly. This is what I said earlier. The Planeswalkers, if you are behind on board, are not that helpful. And it doesn't really matter if it's Chandra or Karn. Greg was the first player to cast 2 spells a turn, and also his start was more synergistic. However, he has already deployed everything his hand had to offer, so now he's living off the top of his deck.
So an Abrade on Walking Ballista met with that Ballista firing off every shot it had straight at Luke Southworth's head. Another copy of Scrap Heap Scavenger, so he has gone spell, but neither of these spells allowing him any blocking potential.
Oh, is that a Virtuous Gearhulk top deck?
It appears to be. If you're going to be living off the top of your deck, then you could do a lot worse than finding that key mythic. All right, where are the counters going to go here for this Virtuous Gearhulk? He's got a lot of them to distribute around. The fact that that Winding Constrictor got killed off when it did turned out to be great news for Luke Southworth, but that's pretty much the only good bit of news for him in this game, because Virtuous Gearhulk is going to make the entire attacking force of Greg Holmes much, much scarier here.
Yeah, everything else is bad news for Luke, so I'm not sure how happy he can be here.
Yeah, this is 6 damage coming through right now, and it will mean that every single one of the threats that Greg Holmes has on the battlefield is lethal here. On top of the fact that Luke Southworth has no blockers available to him, those Scrap Heap Scroungers, they're only good on the attacks, and I think that Luke Southworth here, he's going through the motions, but he has to know that this game must be over, surely.
You forgot to mention that Virtuous Gearhulk has Trample, and there are a few deserts for Greg to activate, so yeah, it wasn't looking too good.
All right, Greg Holmes squaring things up, 1 game apiece. These guys will be going to a game 3. You can see them just shuffling away there. I wouldn't imagine there's likely to be too many adjustments to their decks from sideboard based on the fact that play and draw will now be reversed. But it certainly doesn't hurt now that you've seen a little bit more about what your opponents have going on to at least consider those sideboards, see if some spot adjustments could be made. You can see it's a relatively jovial affair, our feature match area this weekend. And actually, you know what? That's been true pretty much the entire weekend. During the Legacy, we had a lot of players that maybe don't get a chance to play in a feature match area all too terribly often because we don't have so many Legacy events these days. Meanwhile, here in the Standard, one thing that I've been hearing from a lot of people is about how enjoyable this Standard format has been for them. And I know that you were actually saying that, having seen some of these rounds earlier on, Simon, you're seriously thinking about which Standard deck you're going to be building up in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm really motivated to play some Standard now. I will commentate the Pro Tour, so I want to know what's going on in Limited and Dominaria Limited and Standard. And these decks just look like a lot of fun to try out, especially the ones that are almost monocolored. Those interest me the most.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the simplicity that gets built into deck building, and indeed a lot of the other decisions that come around building mana bases and so on when you are playing a simple monocolored deck. I use the term simple in inverted commas because it's not as if there's not a lot of options. We've got a lot of sets to work with in Standard right now, and it's not too many cards that are 100% guaranteed to be in any list. But at the same time, not having to worry about figuring out the details of how many sources of different colors you have, for someone like me who balks at that kind of mathematics, is a welcome change.
I don't want to sound pessimistic or negative, but if you're asking me, it's even too early to think about these individual card choices. We are still in the phase where we are trying to figure out how fast can a deck be, how fast does a deck need to be, and which color combinations actually work under these restrictions. For example, in my personal perspective, Black Queen Constrictor still has to prove that it does that against the red decks, and that's kind of what we are exploring this weekend.
So these players now are drawing their opening hands. We'll see whether or not we're going to get some keeps on there. Did have a mulligan from Greg in the last game, though it didn't seem to work out too badly for him, even with that in mind. And it's a turn 1 Adventurous Impulse. I kind of like this one in the 1-drop. This is an activity that you can undergo on the very first turn of the game to improve your draws a little bit. It's not going to leave you open to losing out to the likes of Goblin Chainwhirler or similar. It'll find you lands when you need them, creatures when you need them. A 1 casting cost spell that is relevant in the early and late game seems like a potential good addition from Dominaria.
I agree. It will not always find what you want. But, for example, if you're looking for lands and the next 3 cards don't have a land, that's probably bad news anyway. Still much better to go through your deck that way.
Woodland Cemetery on turn 2 there from Greg Holmes. The mana base for black-green, not too bad there. Pia Nalar coming down, and with the Thopter token that comes along with her, that just enough to jump in Dad's car and drive it over to Greg Holmes' house, bringing a delivery of 4 damage along the way.
Free shipping.
In the world of Kaladesh, apparently they already have drones making deliveries, and it's working out pretty well for them, it must be said. Jadelight Ranger coming down here for Greg Holmes. The Explorer finds a Fatal Push. That seems like a very fine addition to his hand on this next turn. In the meantime, Jadelight Ranger jumping up to being a 4-3 thanks to the double Explore there. So Luke Southworth, the pressure on him a little bit here to get in damage while he can, because he knows that there will be a removal spell coming soon enough, and it looks like there's an unlicensed Disintegration in hand here. Jadelight Ranger, a reasonable enough creature to remove. Even better than that in terms of mana efficiency is Chandra, Torch of Defiance. We have the whole family getting together here. Chandra, Pia, and, well, the Heart of Kiran at least, getting crewed by Pia, allowing big attacks and an empty board on Greg Holmes' side of things.
Yeah, not only a flavor win, but also an incredible constructed curve. Turn 2 Heart of Kiran, turn 3 Pia Nalar, and turn 4 Chandra on a really juicy target, which was also Greg Holmes' first non-land permanent.
Let's see whether or not Greg Holmes can win some of his money back here. Ancient Bronzodon, a big creature to potentially deal with at least the Heart of Kiran, but you know what? He's got a lot of work to do across a whole bunch of different axes here, and 1 dinosaur may not be enough here.
At least now he has 2 ways to deal with Heart of Kiran. The problem with Fatal Push was that Luke didn't have to activate Heart of Kiran as long as Greg is holding this Fatal Push. Now that he has a 3/4 ground creature, Luke can't really play around that.
Chandra ticking up, representing 2 points of damage as the mountain revealed from the top of the deck there.
This turn is interesting. Maybe you're happy enough just getting in with the Thopter token.
I mean, having Scrap Heap Scrounged crew with there means that at least there's a couple of different attackers going to be coming through.
But I don't like letting Greg Fatal Push the Heart of Kiran, which is what he wants to do the most. You're giving Greg the use of his mana this turn in the most optimal way. Oh, okay. Oh, that's a good reason to force Greg to tap out.
Does not allow that Thrashing Bronzodon to do anything. Unlicensed Disintegration, that's 3 damage. An extra point of damage coming through from the Thopter there. And Greg very much on the back foot here. This red deck giving a large amount of damage very, very early in the game. Just 6 life remaining for Greg Holmes here. And he's going to have to deal with a variety of different types of threats.
Yeah, you need a bit more to deal with such a start. I don't know what it could have been, but if you're just casting Jadelight Rangers and creatures that are on a sheer power level don't compete with Heart of Kiran and Chandra, then you're not going to have a good time.
It's interesting. Unlicensed Disintegration alongside the Blacktivation of Scrap Heap Scrounger were kind of the 2 reasons for the vehicles lists of old to be Mardu. Now, it turns out there are enough good red cards that we can be almost mono-red with just a little bit of black in there for those same elements.
And Greg is almost dead on board here, but not quite.
Yeah, Death Gorge Scavenger definitely has the potential to get him a little bit back in things life total wise. Went up to 8 thanks to the entering the battlefield trigger, and if he gets to attack, he could gain more life yet. Goblin Chainwhirler revealed off Chandra, but happy enough to just let that be damage, because there is Glorybringer. That is the end of this game, and indeed this match. Luke Southworth advancing to 11-2 there at the end of round 13. The Black Red vehicles, they just keep on rumbling, and they are doing very, very nicely for those who have elected to play them this weekend in Birmingham. Be wary for those who are trying to figure out what to play in Standard. This deck is very real and very threatening. We will have more Magic for you soon enough. Do not go anywhere. We've got a Time Walk match for you right after these messages. Hello and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Birmingham. I'm Tim Willoughby. This is Pro Tour winner Dr. Simon Gertzen, and we are very happy to be bringing you just as much of this Dominaria standard as we can. We've already seen a fair amount of standard this round. Obviously, we didn't get to see day one because we were busy covering Legacy, but that does not mean to say that we did not have more to show you. In fact, we're going to head back down to our feature match area now to show you a little bit of time walk magic additionally from this round 13. This is Arno Hochmüller against Charles Elatambi. And settle in, guys. We've got a black-red vehicles mirror. This might be something you have to get used to in this format.
Yep, certainly while the power level of these decks is being explored, it is a very popular choice, and you can see why. It does include so many powerful cards. However, we have to be careful with the naming. There are now basically mono red decks that are aggressive, black red decks that are very aggressive, and then you also have the black red decks that go more into a mid-range direction. So for example, the black red deck of Martin Yuza is very different from this one.
Yeah, and one of the ways that you can start characterizing them is simply by looking out for one drops. The decks that are looking to go a little bit more mid-range, they do tend to skimp a little bit on those one drops, and that's one of the variety of ways that you can sometimes pick them out. Here we see two lists that seem comparatively aggressive. Charles Elatambi will be heading towards the Team Pro Tour. He was a part of a team that from the UK that did very well recently at one of the various Team Limited GPs, but clearly also has moves in constructed here, both these players at 10 and 2. Keru, we've got Earthshakers on one side of things, and on the other side, Walking Ballistas, Scrap Heap Scroungers, and Soulscar Mage, who potentially at some point could team up very nicely indeed with Goblin Chainwhirler.
Yeah, so far both players are playing on 2 lands only, so whoever draws out of this first is going to be favored here.
And it looks like Hochmüller still has a few choices here. Access to at least one copy of Shock in his hand here, and he's got a Soulscar Mage of his own. Throwing around -1/-1 counters as if they were damaged. They essentially are a lot of the time. But Charles Elatambi is the one who's found his 3rd mana first. Soulscar Mage there. The prowess on Soulscar Mage, enough reason to dissuade a block, a sort of a mutual block there. The 1/2s in principle would bounce, but with mana untapped, Charles could have punished that relatively easily. No blocks and a follow-up of Pianalar from Elatambi alongside that Thopter token that she brings.
Arno hesitating just a tiny bit here before attacking. Not just like previous turn, there's not really a big reason to block Soulscar Mage. It looked like a little bit of a tell.
And Hochmüller also now on 3 mana, has Unlicensed Disintegration, chooses to use it here. He's not going to get 3 damage in because he does not control an artifact just now, but killing a creature is still killing a creature. He's found himself make your own murder, if you will. And now we just have dueling Soulscar Mages.
This is really a very even game. Both players doing almost exactly the same thing. Charles now gets the advantage of recurring Scrap Heap Scrounger, though. The first card advantage of the game, if you will.
It's interesting how even amongst decks that you could easily characterize it as being aggro decks that are simply looking to attack in, this idea of card advantage is still very important. There is the potential to run out of resources before you've dealt 20 damage, and if you can do anything at all to try and stave off that moment where you're just living off the top of your deck, it's an important piece of the puzzle to winning these sorts of matches.
Yeah, in the past, card advantage meant you spend 4 mana for a Factor Fiction, or you spend 5 mana to draw 3 cards, but aggressive decks have been getting more and more tools to work with, and you can actually see here how that creates completely different dynamics from the Magic that we played 5 or 10 years ago.
So there we saw a nice interaction. Soulscar Mage being in play meant that the cut half of Cut to Ribbons was able to deal with Hazaret the Fervent, putting 4 -1/-1 counters on the god, far more effective than simply applying 4 damage to it. The damage would not have led to it leaving the battlefield, but this way round, Elatambi at least briefly clearing a path for further attacks. And here's an Unlicensed Disintegration, which, dealing with the one creature able to block, plus dealing 3 damage, enough to close out this first game. Charles Elatambi kind of shortcutting a little bit there just to show what his intent was, but that shortcut ultimately led to him winning the game.
It was a bit of a weird shortcut because Arnaud still had a mana open, so you usually do these kind of things when you're tapped out, but apparently Arnaud didn't have anything, or clearly he didn't have anything.
All right, Scrap Heap Scrounger on one side, Heart of Kiran on the other. Which side of that battlefield do you want to be on?
Well, currently Arnaud is attacking for 3. Ultimately, the Heart of Kiran, if it sticks around, is a bit more powerful, but can Charles really go on offense here? I doubt it.
Just a cycle here from Charles Elatambi. I believe that he did have another land to play already, so I guess that if you don't have a spell to cast once you've got all those lands in play, you might as well draw. But normally cycling in the main phase like that isn't exactly a sign of strength.
No, this is disastrous. He's down to 10. And Arnaud can develop something else.
Down to 9 with this Goblin Chainwhirler.
Okay, I think that's going to be lethal next turn.
Yeah, I mean, even if Charles Elatambi is able to present a blocker or 2 here, there's nothing to say that Arnaud Hochmüller will not have more ways of removing creatures.
Okay, a little bit of a reprieve.
Now, if you're Arnaud Hochmüller in this sort of position, can you afford to just ignore Chandra and keep attacking in?
Yes, you can. You're even holding an unlicensed integration. No, it's an abrade. So in this case, I think you can ignore. I think you can ignore Chandra because dealing 3 to the face is not completely unreasonable.
Now, if you're Charles Elatambi, are you considering crewing that Heart of Kiran? Looks like you are.
And now Arnaud can abrade.
Yeah, and this abrade, just fantastic news for Arnaud Hochmüller here. Able to leave Charles Elatambi on 3 life, facing down 2 lethal creatures with enough lands, enough threats in play that he only needs to look at the lands on the other side of the battlefield. Going to have to be something big here from Charles Elatambi. On the face of things, that Soulscar Mage not going to be enough. There's a Hazaret in hand for Arnaud here.
Yeah, he exposes the Hazaret to Vraska's Contempt here. But, oh.
So, this is a bit of an awkward situation. It looks like Arnaud Hochmüller attacking in, looks like he sees Charles Elatambi scooping up his cards, when in fact Elatambi suggesting that nothing of the sort going on.
Yeah, that should definitely not happen. Now, as far as I can tell, nothing too terrible actually happened. I agree with Arnaud that this was basically a scooping motion by Charles, so let's see what the judge rules about that.
I mean, even if Charles has plays here, he needs quite a lot of them to actually stay alive here.
Yeah, I thought it was Vraska's Contempt, but actually what he's holding, and he also only has a single black source, is a way to deal with the Hazaret.
Well, I mean, regardless of any of the details of the motions going on there, we did see Arnaud Hochmüller win that game. So we're on to game 3 here. Charles Elatambi bathing in sunlight on the right-hand side of our screen. But for now, only lands to play, whereas there's a Soulscar Mage coming from Arnaud Hochmüller. And more cycling here from Charles Elatambi. There's the 3rd mana source and Goblin Chainwhirler.
Pretty sure if Soulscar Mage had only 1 toughness, we wouldn't see as much of him. But with the 2 toughness and prowess, it is a reasonable enough creature here.
So a Magma Spray there, putting 2 -1/-1 counters on the Goblin Chainwhirler. And meaning that, well, I mean, a Chainwhirler on the other side of things would be enough to finish off the Goblin. In the meantime, though, just a PNLR coming along, the 2/2 legend that brings a Thopter with her.
Yeah, but 1/1 first strikers are actually almost irrelevant on the battlefield, so
Tundra Wolves attacking in.
I know if he has a Chainwhirler, can actually delay it for a little bit.
And there is another copy of Goblin Chainwhirler, so that attack would have been slightly punished had PNLR decided to block. right, Arno Hochmüller here. What is his follow-up? He's got Ether Hub, meaning that his mana sorted, even if he wants to cast the likes of a double black spell. Can't imagine there's too many of them in his list.
No,
he has those options.
He's actually a bit unhappy about having that many lands in hand, because it means Hazoret will have a little bit of trouble getting online. However, next turn, I believe we will see a Glorybringer, which is not quite Hazoret, but a super strong play on this board.
There is an unlicensed disintegration sat in hand for Charles Elatambi, so whatever the first big creature is that he chooses to, he will be able to kill with impunity. And right now, with an artifact in play, that will represent 3 damage as well.
Yeah, I think Arnaud has a nice line here. He wants to empty his hand anyway, so I would target the 3/3 Chain Whirler with unlicensed disintegration. That should resolve and trigger prowess on your Soulscarred Mage, and then why not block the 1/1 first strike? I think that's almost like a free creature that Charles is offering here. And I would even consider double blocking it. I guess then you lose your Pia to another Chain Whirler, but it's not the end of the world.
Well, there we see it. It's the unlicensed disintegration. No artifact in play to get the extra 3 points of damage, but at least forcing unlicensed disintegration early here from Charles Elatambi. And we know that there's going to be a much more potent threat coming for Arno Hochmüller here in that Glorybringer, which is able to take down a creature on attacks with that Exert and leave Elatambi with just a 1/1 first striker. Those 2 counters are -1/-1 counters on the Goblin.
I'm a bit surprised about the exertion here. I thought that Scrappy Scoundrel was actually not a very scary card for Arnaud.
I mean, speaking of scary, look at this board that Hochmüller has going on here. Scrapheap Scoundrel alongside Goblin Chainwhirler, alongside that Glorybringer and Pianalar. Meanwhile, Charles Elatambi, yes, he's got a Scrapheap Scoundrel back from the graveyard. Not too much else going on, though. Heart of Kiran, it can block. He's got one good blocker, but with all of the things that Arno Hochmüller has going on here, this is a difficult spot for him.
Yeah, to say the least.
Hazoret the Fervent, how do you feel about that one?
This is a rout.
So, a crew going on, and Arno, before blocks, uses Pia's ability to make it so that Heart of Kiran cannot block. In return, though, we do see the god himself getting exiled. Charles Elatambi clinging on at just the 1 point of life. Walking Ballista coming along here. A few more crews, a few more attacks.
Yeah, but it's not nowhere near lethal. Arnaud went to 6 and was facing a Walking Ballista on 3, so Charles made it close, but not enough.
I kind of like the fact that Charles showed that he at least had a little bit of game in the last stages there, even if he wasn't able to make it through. The Black-Red Mirror, a lot of maneuvering, a lot of sort of positioning there ultimately in order to figure out the right lines in the end of things. Hochmüller winning on our 10-walk match. Plenty of good magic, though, in this round. We will have Raph and Riley back with more magic for you soon enough. Stick around, guys. We'll have it all after these messages.